Ken Masters had been coming to Marlowe's fueling depot and cantina every morning for 19 months. He always ordered the same thing. Black synth coffee, no sweetener, served in the dented metal cup he brought from his ship. He always sat at the same corner booth facing the entrance. He always left exactly 12 credits on the counter, even though the coffee only cost 8. And he never, not once, smiled. Tasara Moon had memorized every detail of this routine because she was, as her people would say, Keleth touched, meaning she paid too much attention to things that weren't her concern. It was one of the many reasons her own kind had made her childhood a living nightmare. Too curious, too observant, too human in her mannerisms, they'd said, as if that were the worst insult imaginable. But there was something about the human veteran that drew her attention like a gravity well she couldn't escape. Maybe it was the way his dark hair fell across the scar running from his temple to his jaw, evidence of a war he never talked about. Maybe it was the quiet way he said, "Please," and "Thank you," when most spacers just grunted at her. Or maybe it was the fact that despite the haunted look in his brown eyes, he always asked about her day, even when she could tell he wasn't really listening to the answer. Today, however, Tasara wasn't thinking about any of that. Today, she was thinking about the message that had arrived on her personal comm 3 weeks ago, and how she had exactly 6 hours to make the most humiliating request of her entire life. She watched Ken drain his coffee, fold his credit chip onto the counter, and head for the exit. His worn brown and gray armor, patched in a dozen places and bearing the faded insignia of the Terran Frontier Corps, creaked with each step. He moved like a man who expected danger around every corner, which, on Outpost Kerigan 12, wasn't entirely unreasonable. Tasara's hands were shaking as she untied her work apron. Her green skin had gone pale at the edges, a sure sign of stress that any Valoran would recognize immediately. The blue crystal embedded in her forehead, a natural feature of her species that regulated emotional energy, pulsed erratically. "Do it now," she told herself, "before you lose your nerve." She burst through the cantina's back door and into the depot's main landing bay, her silvery blonde hair whipping behind her as she ran. "Mr. Masters, wait." Ken turned, his hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm holstered at his hip before he registered who was calling him. His expression shifted from combat-ready to confused, which Tasara realized was probably the most emotion she'd ever seen on his face. Tasara. He stood next to his ship, a battered cargo hauler called the Silent Promise that looked like it had survived at least 3 major engagements. "Something wrong with my tab?" "No. She skidded to a stop in front of him, her breath coming in short bursts. The bay smelled like engine grease and ozone. Somewhere in the distance, a dock worker was shouting about a misaligned fuel coupling. "I know this is strange. I know we don't really know each other. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say no." Ken's scarred face remained unreadable. He crossed his arms over his chest, the servos in his armor's joints whirring softly. "I'm listening." Tasara pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to cry. She'd rehearsed this speech 100 times in the mirror, but now that she was standing here, all her carefully prepared words had evaporated like water on a hot thruster plate. "Can you pretend to be my boyfriend for a day?" The words hung between them, ridiculous and raw. Ken didn't move, didn't speak. Tasara felt humiliation wash over her like a cold wave. "I know how that sounds," she rushed on, her voice trembling. "I know you probably think I'm crazy. But there's a ceremony tonight, the Valoran Gathering of Bloom. It only happens once every 31 years, and everyone from my homeworld is required to attend. Including the people who made my life miserable when I was young." Her voice cracked. "They called me Keleth Touched. They said I was defective because my skin is too pale. Because my crystal is the wrong shade of blue. Because I showed interest in humans and their culture instead of proper Valoran traditions. They said no Valoran male would ever claim me, and I'd die alone, unmourned, forgotten." She was crying now, her tears leaving faintly bioluminescent trails down her green cheeks. "I've avoided this ceremony for 6 cycles, but this time, my grandmother is dying. And she begged me to come. She's the only person who ever believed in me, and I can't let her final memory of me be you walking in alone," Ken finished quietly. Tasara nodded, unable to speak. For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant clanking of the depot and the soft hum of ships cycling through their startup sequences. Tasara braced herself for rejection, for laughter, for pity, for the polite dismissal she knew was coming. What she didn't expect was for Ken Masters to ask, "What time should I pick you up?" Her eyes went wide. The crystal on her forehead flared with surprised light. "What? The ceremony? What time does it start? You'll do it? Really?" Tasara stared at him as if he'd suddenly sprouted a second head. "Why?" Something flickered in Ken's brown eyes. Something old and painful and deeply familiar. "Because I know what it's like," he said simply. "To be the kid everyone decided wasn't worth a damn. To have people's cruelty follow you like a shadow, even when you've built a whole new life." He glanced down at his scarred hands, at the armor that had seen too many battles. "And because you're the only person on this station who remembers that my daughter's favorite color is purple, even though I only mentioned it once, 8 months ago, when you asked why I was buying violet ribbon at the supply store." Tasara felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall of loneliness she'd built around herself. "Her name is Penny," Ken continued, and his voice grew rougher. "She's 9 years old. Her mother died 4 years ago, caught in the crossfire when a pirate raid hit our colony. I've been trying to keep her safe ever since. Trying to be enough for her." He met Tasara's eyes. "But I'm not good at the soft stuff. I don't know how to answer when she asks if her mom can see her from wherever she is now. I work. I survive. I try not to think too hard about what I've lost. And you still want to help me?" Tasara whispered. "You give me extra foam on my coffee without me asking," Ken said. "You ask about my day. You treat me like a person instead of another broken veteran taking up space." He shrugged, a gesture that looked almost awkward on his soldier's frame. "Seems like the least I can do is wear something nice and stand next to you for a few hours." Tasara laughed. A real laugh, full of relief and disbelief, and the first genuine joy she'd felt in weeks. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no Don't thank me yet," Ken said, and for just a moment, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "I haven't worn formal clothes since my wedding. I might show up looking like a Delvian mud crawler." The gathering of Bloom was held in the grand atrium of the Valorian Embassy, a crystalline structure that floated in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant Carrion Prime. Transport shuttles ferried guests from the surface station, and Tasara spent the entire 20-minute journey with her hands clasped so tightly that her green knuckles had turned almost white. Ken had surprised her. Instead of his battered armor, he wore a dark formal suit that actually fit, charcoal gray with subtle silver threading that complemented the military medals he'd pinned to his chest. He'd even trimmed his dark hair, although the scar on his face was still prominently visible. He looked, Tasara thought, like something out of the old Earth films she'd secretly watched as a child. Commanding, handsome, dangerous, in a way that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. "You clean up well," she managed. "My wife used to say I look like a grumpy undertaker in formal wear," Ken replied. "So I'll take that as an improvement." When they arrived at the embassy, Tasara felt her throat constrict. The grand atrium was spectacular. Towering crystal spires refracting the light of Carrion Prime's sun into cascading rainbows, floating platforms connected by bridges of solidified light, gardens of bioluminescent Valoran flowers that bloomed in time with the sacred music drifting through hidden speakers. Hundreds of Valorans mingled on the platforms, their green skin ranging from deep emerald to pale jade, their forehead crystals glowing in shades of pink, gold, and violet. Tasara's crystal was blue, the wrong shade, according to tradition. A mark of impurity in her genetic line. "You okay?" Ken asked quietly, offering his arm. She took it, grateful for the steadiness of his presence. "I haven't been here in 31 years. Since I was 15. What happened when you were 15? "The first gathering I attended. My parents forced me to come, hoping I'd find a traditional match." Tasara's smile was bitter. "Instead, I found out exactly what everyone thought of me. The daughter of the council elder's family, a girl named Melindra Vex, made it her personal mission to ensure I knew my place. And where was that? Beneath everyone else. Beneath notice. Beneath love." Tasara squared her shoulders as they stepped onto the main platform. "But I survived. I left Valoria, made my own way, built my own life. And tonight, I'm going to walk in there with my head held high." Ken squeezed her arm gently. "That's the spirit." They'd barely made it 10 steps into the gathering when Tasara heard a voice that still featured prominently in her nightmares. Well, look what the cargo shuttle dragged in." Melindra Vex hadn't changed much in 31 years. She was taller than Tasara, her green skin a deep, fashionable emerald, her forehead crystal a brilliant gold that marked her as genetically elite. She wore a gown of woven starlight, literally, a fabric that could only be produced in the heart of a dying star, and her expression was the same cruel smile Tasara remembered from adolescence. Behind Melindra stood her entourage, 3 other Valoran women of obvious high status, all watching the exchange with predatory interest. Tasara Moon, I genuinely didn't think you'd show your face here. Melindra's eyes swept over Tasara's simpler gown, a flowing dress of pale gold that Tasara had saved 8 months' worth of credits to afford, and her lip curled. Still pretending you belong with the rest of us? I was invited, Tasara said, her voice only trembling slightly. By my grandmother. Ah, yes. Poor matriarch Celine. Such a shame her only grandchild turned out to be. Melindra waved a dismissive hand. Tasara felt herself shrinking, felt all the old shame and self-hatred rising up like bile in her throat. She opened her mouth to apologize, to excuse herself, to flee. That's enough. Ken's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient music and conversation like a plasma blade through hull plating. Heads turned throughout the platform. Even the floating server drones paused their circuits to observe. He stepped forward, placing himself between Tasara and Melindra, and fixed the Valoran woman with a look that Tasara suspected had made hardened pirates reconsider their life choices. I don't know what kind of garbage they teach in your fancy Valoran schools, Ken said evenly. But where I come from, we have a word for people who build themselves up by tearing others down. We call them cowards. Melindra's golden crystal flickered with outrage. How dare you, a human, speak to me this way? Do you have any idea who I am? Who my family is? Lady, I've stared down Harbinger assault ships at the Battle of Telmar 9. I've walked through minefields on Ketras Colony while half my platoon bled out behind me. I've held the line against impossible odds because that's what soldiers do. Ken's scarred face was utterly calm. You think your family name is supposed to scare me? The atrium had gone very quiet. Tasara could see other Valorans watching the confrontation, some with disapproval, others with barely concealed curiosity, and a few, to her surprise, with something like satisfaction. I've known Tasara for 19 months, Ken continued. In that time, she's shown me more kindness than most people manage in a lifetime. She remembers details about my daughter that I've never even told her. She makes the best coffee on Outpost Kerigan 12, and she does it with a smile, even when she's hurting inside. She is worth 1,000 of whatever you think you are. He took a step closer to Melindra, who actually stepped backward. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your friends, walk back to whatever dark corner you crawled out of, and leave Tasara alone for the rest of the evening. And if I hear that you've said one more cruel word to her, tonight, or ever, I will make it my personal mission to ensure that every major trading port in this sector knows exactly what kind of person hides behind that pretty crystal on your forehead. He smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I've got connections from here to the outer rim. Test me. Melindra's face had gone an ugly shade of dark green. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. Her entourage looked at each other uncertainly, their earlier smugness completely evaporated. Finally, without a word, Melindra turned on her heel and stalked away, her starlight gown trailing behind her like a defeated banner. Her followers scrambled to keep up, whispering frantically among themselves. The murmur of conversation slowly resumed around them. Ken turned back to Tasara and found her staring at him with tears streaming down her green cheeks, her blue crystal pulsing with so much light it was almost blinding. "No one has ever done that for me before," she whispered. "No one has ever stood up for me like that. Then everyone you've met before was an idiot," Ken said simply. And something passed between them in that moment. Something that had nothing to do with pretending, nothing to do with arranged appearances. It was real and raw and terrifying in the best possible way. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur that Tasara would treasure for the rest of her life. They danced. Or rather, Ken attempted the traditional Valoran steps while Tasara tried desperately not to laugh at his determined but graceless efforts. "I'm a soldier, not a dancer," he muttered, nearly stepping on her foot for the 5th time. "The last time I danced was at my wedding, and my wife said I moved like a malfunctioning battle droid." "You're doing fine," Tasara assured him, guiding him through a simpler movement. "Just feel the music. I feel like an idiot. A handsome idiot, at least." Ken's scarred face actually flushed. It was adorable. They visited her grandmother, the ancient matriarch Celine, who was seated in a place of honor near the central spire. The old woman's green skin had faded to an almost gray-green, and her crystal, once brilliant violet, had dimmed with age, but her eyes were still sharp, and they lit up when she saw Tasara approach. "My little Keleth touched one," Celine said, using the term as an endearment rather than an insult. "You came. You actually came. I promised, grandmother." Tasara knelt beside her, taking her wrinkled hands. "And I brought someone I wanted you to meet." Celine's gaze moved to Ken, assessing him with the wisdom of nearly 300 years. "A human soldier. Scarred but unbroken. Good posture. Kind eyes. Though he hides it well." She smiled, revealing teeth that were still surprisingly strong. "You chose well, granddaughter." "Grandmother, he's not actually." "I know exactly what he is and what he isn't," Celine interrupted gently. "But I also know what he could be. And more importantly, so does he." She looked at Ken directly. "Take care of her, soldier. She's been alone too long." Ken met the old woman's gaze steadily. "I will, matriarch. That's a promise." Later, as they stood on a crystalline balcony overlooking the swirling clouds of Carrion Prime, Tasara found herself talking more than she had in years. She told Ken about her parents, who had died in a transport accident when she was 23, leaving her truly alone. She told him about the cantina job, which she'd taken because it let her meet new people without ever having to get too close to anyone. She told him about the dreams she'd abandoned, of becoming a cultural ambassador, of building bridges between species, of proving that being Keleth touched wasn't a curse, but a gift. And Ken, to her surprise, opened up as well. He told her about the war, about the Harbinger conflicts that had consumed 15 years of his life and left him with scars, both visible and invisible. He told her about Lydia, his wife, who had been a colony physician with a laugh that could light up any room. He told her about the day the raiders came, and how he'd arrived 3 minutes too late to save her. Penny was 5, he said, his voice rough with old grief. She was hiding in a closet when I found her. Lydia had put her there, told her to stay quiet no matter what. She saved our daughter's life by giving up her own. Tasara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough with calluses, but they curled around hers with surprising gentleness. I've spent 4 years trying to be both mother and father to that little girl, Ken continued, and failing at both. She's so quiet now, so withdrawn. She used to laugh all the time, but since Lydia, I don't know how to reach her anymore. You're trying, Tasara said softly. That counts for more than you know. Does it? Ken looked at her, and for the first time she saw the full depth of his vulnerability, the fear and exhaustion and desperate love of a father who would do anything for his child, but didn't know what anything should be. Because most nights, I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Wake up, feed Penny, get her to school, work, pick her up, dinner, bedtime, repeat. I'm not living, I'm just existing. I know that feeling, Tasara admitted. Better than you might think. Their eyes met in the soft glow of the gas giant's reflected light, and Tasara felt something shift between them. A wall crumbling, a bridge being built. This doesn't have to be pretend, she whispered, hardly believing her own courage. If you don't want it to be. Ken was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her green knuckles. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. 3 weeks after the gathering of Bloom, Tasara stood in the doorway of Ken's quarters on Outpost Kerigan 12, holding a bag of baking ingredients and trying to remember how to breathe. You're here. A small blur of motion crashed into her legs. Penny Masters was a tiny hurricane of energy, with her father's dark hair and her mother's, according to photographs Tasara had seen, bright, inquisitive eyes. She wore a purple dress that was slightly too big for her, and her face was covered in what appeared to be chocolate. I thought we could make cookies, Tasara said, kneeling down to the girl's level. If that's okay with you. Penny's eyes went wide. Real cookies. Not scented ones. Real cookies with real flour and real sugar and real chocolate chips. The look on Penny's face was worth every credit Tasara had spent on the imported ingredients. Best day ever. Ken appeared in the doorway, looking slightly overwhelmed. She's been vibrating with excitement since I told her you were coming. I think she might actually be generating her own power source at this point. Come on. Penny grabbed Tasara's hand and began dragging her toward the kitchen. I know where all the bowls are. And the spoons. And Daddy's secret chocolate stash that he thinks I don't know about. Ken's expression shifted from fond exasperation to mild alarm. My what now? The afternoon that followed was the happiest Tasara could remember in years. They made cookies. Or rather, they made a spectacular mess while technically also producing cookies. Flour ended up in Penny's hair, on the ceiling. How that happened, no one could quite explain, and somehow inside Ken's boot. Tasara demonstrated how to crack eggs, and Penny demonstrated her unique technique of applying approximately 3 times too many chocolate chips to every batch. The recipe says half a cup, Tasara pointed out gently. The recipe doesn't understand my vision, Penny declared solemnly. Ken snorted with laughter. Actual laughter. The first real laugh Tasara had heard from him, and she felt her heart swell with something dangerously close to love. Later, after the cookies were baked and most of them eaten, Penny wanted to show Tasara her room. It was a small space, but filled with color, drawings taped to every wall, a shelf of well-worn books, and a bed covered in stuffed animals of various species and sizes. "This is Captain Snuggles," Penny said seriously, holding up a threadbare teddy bear. "He's the bravest soldier in the galaxy. Daddy says Mommy gave him to me when I was born." Tasara sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the carefully arranged menagerie. "He looks like a very good captain." "He is. He protects me from nightmares." Penny hesitated, then looked at Tasara with an expression that was far too old for a 9-year-old. "Do you have someone who protects you from nightmares?" "I'm learning to," Tasara said softly. "Good." Penny nodded firmly. "Nightmares are scary, but they're less scary if someone helps." As Tasara helped Penny organize her art supplies, she noticed a small piece of paper tucked beneath the girl's pillow. The edge was visible, clearly well worn, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. "What's that?" Tasara asked, reaching for it without thinking. Penny's face went pale. "That's private. It's..." But Tasara had already begun unfolding it, and her hands trembled as she read the childish handwriting. "Dear Mommy in the stars. I miss you so much. My heart hurts sometimes and I don't know how to make it better. Daddy is sad. He pretends he's not, but I can tell. He doesn't smile anymore. He doesn't sing the funny songs he used to sing when we made breakfast. Can you please send someone to help us? Someone nice. Someone who makes good food and has a pretty smile and doesn't mind that I talk too much sometimes. I promise I'll be good forever. I'll eat all my vegetables and go to bed on time and never complain about homework again. I love you, Mommy. Please help us. Love, Penny." Day 847 since you went away. Tasara's hands shook as she calculated. Day 847. That was the exact morning she had chased Ken out of the cantina. The exact day she had asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend. "You weren't supposed to read that," Penny whispered, her voice small and frightened. "It's just for Mommy." Tasara couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her green cheeks, making bioluminescent trails that dripped onto the worn paper. Her blue crystal pulsed so brightly it illuminated the entire room. Ken appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of crying. "What's wrong? What?" Tasara wordlessly held out the letter. She watched as Ken read it, watched his face go pale beneath the scar, watched him read it again and again as if trying to make sense of something impossible. She wrote this. His voice was barely audible. Day 847. That's the morning you asked me. I know. Tasara couldn't stop crying. I know. Penny had climbed onto the bed and was hugging Tasara around the waist, her small face pressed against the alien woman's side. You came, she said, her voice muffled but full of wonder. Mommy sent you, just like I asked. The three of them stayed there for a long time, holding each other in the small room covered in children's drawings, the letter pressed between them like something sacred. I don't know if I believe in coincidences anymore, Ken finally said, his voice rough with emotion. But I know that whatever brought you into our lives, fate, luck, or something I don't have words for, I'm grateful. So am I, Tasara whispered. And for the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. The months that followed were a slow and beautiful transformation. Tasara began spending more time at Ken's quarters than her own small apartment. She was there for breakfast, teaching Penny how to make pancakes the traditional Valoran way, with bioluminescent fruit that changed color depending on how ripe it was. She was there for homework help, patiently explaining mathematics and reading with Penny on the couch while Ken pretended not to watch them with a soft expression on his scarred face. She was there for the nightmares, too. The first time she stayed overnight in the spare room, because neither she nor Ken wanted to rush whatever was developing between them, she heard Penny screaming at 3 in the morning. By the time she reached the girls' room, Ken was already there, holding his daughter as she sobbed about fire and running and a mother who couldn't be saved. Tasara sat beside them both, her green hand stroking Penny's dark hair, her presence somehow making the darkness feel less overwhelming. Stay, Penny whimpered. Please stay. Always. Tasara promised. She meant it. The romance between her and Ken grew in quiet moments. Shared glances across the breakfast table, fingers brushing as they passed in the small kitchen, long conversations on the balcony after Penny was asleep. Tasara learned that Ken had a surprisingly good sense of humor when he let his guard down, and that he was genuinely interested in learning about Valoran culture, despite its people having treated her so badly. The species isn't the problem, she explained one night, watching the distant stars through the viewport. It's just some of the people in it. Like humans have cruel people and kind people. So do we. Seems obvious when you say it like that. Ken was sitting close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. I think most folks forget to see it that clearly. You didn't, Tasara said softly. That first day, when I asked you, you saw me. Not my species, not my crystal, not all the things that make me different. Just me. Ken turned to look at her, his brown eyes warm in the starlight. You were the first person in 4 years who made me feel like a person instead of a ghost. Their first kiss happened 3 weeks later on the balcony under a sky full of unfamiliar constellations. It was tentative at first. Tasara wasn't entirely sure how human and Valoran physiology would interact, and Ken hadn't kissed anyone since Lydia. But when their lips met, It felt right. Natural. Like coming home after a long journey through hostile space. Penny, who had apparently been spying from behind the curtain, cheered so loudly that the neighbors complained. 15 months after that first kiss, the Master's Moon family stood in the cargo bay of the Silent Promise, which had been transformed for a very special occasion. Twinkling lights had been strung between the cargo containers. Tables covered in white cloth held food from both Earth and Veloria. A small gathering of friends, dock workers from the station, regular customers from the cantina, Ken's few remaining military buddies who'd traveled across the sector to attend, stood in rows of mismatched chairs. And at the front of it all, before a makeshift altar constructed from old crates and decorated with Valoran bioluminescent flowers, Tasara and Ken faced each other. "I wasn't looking for this," Ken said, his voice rough but steady. "I wasn't looking for anything except survival. And then you chased me across a docking bay and asked me the craziest question I'd ever heard." The gathering laughed. Tasara's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of green. "But here's the thing," Ken continued. "That question, can you pretend to be my boyfriend for a day? It wasn't crazy at all. It was brave. It was hopeful. It was everything I'd forgotten how to be." He took her hands in his. "You brought light back into a life I'd given up on. You taught my daughter how to laugh again. You taught me how to laugh again. And I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure you never doubt that you're exactly where you belong." Tasara was crying again, happy tears that glowed faintly against her green skin. "I spent my whole life believing I was defective," she said. "Believing that no one could love someone like me. But you looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. And you kept looking at me that way, day after day, until I finally started to believe it myself." She squeezed his hands tightly. "You didn't just pretend to be my boyfriend for a day, Ken Masters. You became my partner, my protector, my family." She glanced at Penny, who was practically bouncing with excitement in her position as flower girl. "You gave me everything I never knew I was missing." "Then let me give you one more thing," Ken said, reaching into his pocket and producing 2 rings, one sized for a human hand, one carefully adjusted for Valoran physiology. "A promise that this will never be pretend again." When they kissed, the cargo bay erupted in cheers. Penny threw handfuls of flower petals into the air with such enthusiasm that several of them landed in the wedding cake. And somewhere out there, among the stars that had watched this unlikely love story unfold, perhaps a mother who had given her life to save her daughter, smiled. 18 months after the wedding, Tasara stood in the medical bay of Outpost Kerigan 12, holding a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. The baby, a boy, had his father's dark hair and his mother's green-tinted skin. His forehead bore a small crystalline formation that the doctor said would grow into a full Valoran crystal over time, though its final color wouldn't be apparent for years. He had been born 3 weeks early, eager to join a family that had already been waiting for him with more love than they knew what to do with. "We need a name," Ken said, sitting on the edge of the bed with his arm around Tasara. Penny was perched on his other side, staring at her baby brother with an expression of profound wonder. "I was thinking about that," Tasara said. "What do you think about calling him Liam? It means protector in one of the old Earth languages. And for his middle name," she looked at Ken. "I thought maybe we could honor someone." Ken's throat tightened. "You mean Liam Marcus Masters Moon? For my father. The man who taught me that kindness matters." Ken couldn't speak. He just pulled his wife and children closer, holding onto them as if they were the only things tethering him to the universe. "I love it," he finally managed. "It's perfect. Everything about this is perfect," Penny declared with the absolute certainty of an 11-year-old who had decided something and would not be moved. "Our family is perfect. Baby Liam is perfect. Even your weird cooking is perfect, Tasara." "Weird cooking?" Tasara raised an eyebrow. "The glowy fruit stuff. It's weird." Penny grinned. "But I love it anyway." Later that night, after Penny had been reluctantly convinced to go to sleep and the baby was dozing peacefully in his crib, Ken found Tasara standing by the viewport of their quarters. The letter, Penny's letter, now framed and hanging on the wall of their living room, was reflected in the glass. "Day 847, Tasara murmured. "I still think about it sometimes. The odds against us ever meeting, let alone ending up here." Ken wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You believe in fate." "I didn't used to." She leaned back against him. "But now, I don't know. Maybe there are things in this universe we can't explain. Connections that exist beyond logic." She turned to look at the letter. "A little girl wrote a letter to her mother in the stars. And on that same morning, on the other side of the station, I suddenly found the courage to ask a stranger an impossible question." "Sounds like fate to me," Ken said. "Or maybe," Tasara smiled, "it sounds like love." They stood there together, watching the stars wheel slowly past, listening to the soft sounds of their son sleeping and their daughter dreaming, and their life, their impossible, unexpected, beautiful life, continuing on. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest questions. Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to ask and kind enough to answer, pretend becomes real, and strangers become family, and the universe itself seems to lean in and whisper, "Yes, this is exactly how it was supposed to be." Penny woke briefly in the middle of the night and padded to the window of her room, looking up at the same stars her parents had been watching. "Thanks, Mommy," she whispered into the darkness. "You sent me the best present ever." And somewhere among those distant points of light, something seemed to twinkle just a little brighter. The end.